And Lord Dannatt, just to bring you in, 75 billion, awful lot of money. What do we know about how and where this is going to be spent?
Well, it's going to be spent pretty broadly right across the defence piece, starting at the sort of top end, if you like, the high-tech end, investing more in some of the new weapons and the new technologies that we've been reading about, a new laser defence system. But more critically, what the Ukraine war has shown that there are deficiencies in quite a number of areas. On our land forces, for example, we are woefully short of air defence capability ourselves. We're short of artillery, and we're short of artillery ammunition. And then, of course, you look across the other environments. Fast jet aircraft are very expensive. We haven't got the full complement of F-35s that we wanted to put on the aircraft carriers. There's quite an ambitious shipbuilding program, and we need to have that because the Royal Navy has got the smallest number of frigates and destroyers that it's ever had. So there are areas in the round, but I think critically, and I think quite rightly, the Prime Minister has said that the first priority, or certainly amongst his top three priorities, was supporting Ukraine. And that's where the first extra £500 million are going. And Defence Secretary a little early this morning, I heard him say that he could have used that on UK defence, but thought that at this stage, I think he's right, that this should go to Ukraine. So 75 billion between now and 2030 sounds like a lot, but without sounding negative, I'm amongst those who have been saying that our defence budget should rise through 2.5% to 3%. And I think if you look around the world, not just tensions over China and Taiwan and America, not just in the Middle East, but particularly in Europe, and the threat from Russia manifested in Ukraine, and potentially, if not stubbed out there, potentially elsewhere in Europe. This money is welcome, but it may not just might not be enough.
Jack, can I come back to you, my friend? A couple of things. You're talking there about, you spoke to the Prime Minister. One thing that was raised by several people this morning, well, two things, actually. The first is they did a budget 3 weeks ago and no mention was made of defence, which is interesting because they talked about tax cuts, and you were with us in the studio, and it was almost as if the British people had sussed out that if you get a tax cut, you're going to have to pay it back. I think that's caused confusion. I'd love to see how Sunak answers that one. Plus, I'm not condoning anything that Donald Trump does or says, but what Sean Bell agreed with me this morning on this. Donald Trump has been saying that NATO should step up. Germany doesn't pay 2.5%, other countries in Europe. And actually, maybe this is a chance for us to show what should be done. Your thoughts on both of those things, pal?
Yeah, interesting. After we get to this 2.5% in 2030, Britain will be by far and away the second largest cash spender on defence in NATO, and the top in Europe, if obviously you discard the US. Some important points from yesterday, which I think have sort of gone under the radar, is that we are now going to commit as a baseline £3 billion every single year for at least the next 5 years. So that's 15 billion in total on our support for Ukraine. People will see that genuinely, I think, as a good thing, although, obviously some callers in today saying that, as the cost of living crisis bites, should we really be spending this money on Ukraine? On the other point about spending, it's going to be so difficult now. Rishi Sunak has boxed himself in on his tax and spend plans. We don't have a spending review for a while. And you're right, people would think we had a budget a few weeks ago. That would have been the time to announce this. And so you can get all your ducks in the row, make sure it is signed off by the OBR. But obviously, he hasn't done that. He's chosen to come to Warsaw, Berlin, make a big show on the global stage that Britain is going to be stumping up billions pounds more for defence. And yes, I think that there is a certain tact in trying to position himself as a massive figure on the world stage. I think that it really rankles when people like Ben Wallace and other former defence ministers come into him and level the accusation that you don't care about defence. You're sort of a technocrat, and as Chancellor, you tried to starve the defence budget in real terms. I think that has rankled with him, and I think that he does see a dividing line with Labour on this one, and I think that's why he's committed that pledge.
Thanks, and Lord Dannatt, what would you say to our viewers and listeners who have got concerns about this increase in spending? For them, their sole focus is really the cost of living crisis. How would you explain to them why this kind of increase is important?
Well, I think the government has to make the case that they realise that the first duty of government is to protect the security of the country. That's the sovereign territory of this country and the security of our people, both at home and overseas. Now, of course, the principal challenge in meeting that for government is to make decisions on priorities. Now, of course, we'd all love to see more money being spent on the health service, education, transport, social care, and so on and so forth. But the government has got to make the case, and if there's a change of government later in the year, another government will have to make the case that they understand that this first duty is to protect the sovereign territory of this country and also the people of this country. That's what they've got to do. You ask why it's surprising that 3 weeks on from a budget we're suddenly getting this. Well, I saw something in the Conservative press, and I am an independent, I'll point out, before the budget, to say that 75% of Conservative voters would prefer to see an increase in defence spending rather than tax cuts. And I think there's a political element here, well, several political elements, one of which is that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt realise that a lot of their supporters would prefer to see an increased spending on defence rather than tax cuts. So that's a little bit not surprising that they're making this suggestion now. And I know there is the cynical charge that, of course, by saying this, in the likelihood of a change of government later in the year, that, of course, an incoming Labour government, if that's what happens, would be committed to the same increase in spending, or otherwise would be open to charges of cutting defence spending at a time when clearly the world is very insecure. So there's many dimensions to this, but the bottom line is it should be welcomed. But I'm not alone in questioning whether we're going far enough, fast enough.
Lord Richard Dannatt, thank you very much indeed.